the teenager who stayed awake for 11 days for a science fair project. A 17-year-old student once stayed awake for 11 days and 25 minutes, and the real story is less heroic and far more alarming. His name was Randy Gardner, and during winter break in late 1963 and early 1964, he pushed himself to about 264 hours without sleep. The vigil began on December 28, 1963, and ended on January 8, 1964, making it one of the most famous sleep deprivation cases ever recorded. At first, Gardner was watched by friends, which already tells you this was not a perfectly controlled modern lab study. Later, sleep researcher William Dement joined the monitoring, and Navy medical personnel, including John J. Ross, also became involved. So this event was part science fair project, part publicity moment, part endurance stunt, and part informal scientific observation. That messy setup is important because the case became famous, but it was never designed with every careful rule modern researchers would want. Even so, what happened to Gardner gave the world a vivid look at what prolonged wakefulness can do to the human mind. In the early days, the problems were mild enough that some people might underestimate them, with nausea, trouble focusing, and strange sensory oddities. Those early changes matter because sleep loss often starts by making the mind less reliable before the body looks dramatically sick. By around day 3 and day 4, the damage became clearer through moodiness, irritability, memory lapses, poor concentration, and worse cooperation. That means even before the most shocking symptoms appeared, attention, mood, and everyday thinking were already breaking down in obvious ways. In the middle phase, things became much more serious, with hallucination-like experiences, perceptual distortion, trouble naming ordinary objects, and speech problems. Imagine looking at a normal object and struggling to pull up its simple name, even though you should know it. Contemporary descriptions also say Gardner mistook a street sign for a person, which shows how badly perception can distort without sleep. He had trouble with tongue twisters, which sounds small, but it shows speech and coordination-like tasks were beginning to unravel. He also struggled with serial subtraction and other concentration tests, which means even basic mental tracking was becoming harder to hold together. Later, the symptoms deepened into slurred speech, fragmented thinking, paranoia-like suspicion, severely reduced attention, and sharply diminished mental efficiency. That phrase, mental efficiency, matters because a person can still be awake, talking, and moving while thinking in a far less reliable way. Some episodes resembled psychosis, with hallucinations, paranoia, and distorted thought, though sleep-deprived people may still retain partial insight. In other words, Gardner did not necessarily believe every strange perception with total certainty, at least early on, but his mind was clearly under severe strain. Some of these symptoms may have been more like dream fragments leaking into waking life than a stable long-term psychiatric illness. That distinction matters because sleep deprivation can create psychosis-like symptoms without being the same as a chronic psychotic disorder. One striking part of the case is that Gardner did not show obvious catastrophic physical collapse, even while his mental state worsened dramatically. That fact helped create the popular myth that he recovered fine, as if the whole event proved the body can handle lost sleep. But the better lesson is almost the opposite, because the brain can become profoundly impaired long before the body looks near death. When the experiment ended, Gardner was taken to a naval hospital, where his brain waves were observed during recovery. He then slept for about 14 hours on the first recovery night, which sounds huge but still does not mean all lost function was magically restored. Reports from the time emphasized that he appeared medically healthy and recovered remarkably quickly in outward terms. That narrow phrase, in outward terms, is crucial, because looking normal again does not prove every effect vanished cleanly or safely. The case mattered because it showed how severe sleep loss disrupts cognition before necessarily producing dramatic physical breakdown. It also gave researchers a famous example of hallucinations and microsleep-like failures after prolonged wakefulness. Microsleep-like failures are dangerous because they are tiny breakdowns in alertness that can appear while a person still seems awake. This case also helped popularize sleep science at a time when the field was much younger and less visible to the public. People often say Gardner suffered no lasting effects, but the accurate claim is narrower than that popular retelling. What was not documented at the time was clear long-term physical or neurological damage, and that is not the same thing as proving safety. Gardner later reported insomnia in adulthood, though nobody can firmly prove that the 1964 experiment caused that later sleep trouble. So the right conclusion is not everything turned out fine, but long-term harm was not clearly documented in the ways people were watching. Record-keeping groups eventually stopped recognizing sleep deprivation records, And they did that because the health risks were too serious. That policy change says a lot, because even if such stunts attract attention, they are not considered responsible achievements worth encouraging. The biggest misconception is that Gardner beat biology through pure willpower, as if determination alone conquered the need for sleep. The real story shows the opposite, because the longer he stayed awake, the more perception, language, attention, mood, and reasoning fell apart. Another misconception is that one big recovery sleep simply repaid the debt, like balancing a math problem with missing hours on one side. Recovery begins quickly, but the return to normal thinking is more complicated than just matching hours lost with hours slept. A person can still be standing, talking, and answering questions while becoming less safe, less accurate, less perceptive, and less trustworthy than they appear. Today, an experiment like this, involving a minor, would likely be judged unacceptable risk by a modern ethics board. That is why Randy Gardner's story matters, not as a tale of human triumph, but as a warning about how fast the mind unravels without sleep. If this story shocked you, the next video should be the one about what 7 nights of 6-hour sleep does before things ever get this extreme.